Chapter 11. A Burned Letter. He couldn't switch out. He tried and tried again until Nana had pulled him away from the front, gasping heavily. They always get sick when he touched stuff. He didn't know why, he didn't know how, and now someone he didn't even know the identity of was sitting beside Mom and Kacchan. "Who is it?" Izuku screamed, his hands shaking as they grabbed Nana's shirt. "You guys never tell me. You're keeping secrets. How am I supposed to work with you guys if you don't tell me stuff?" Nana grabbed him tightly, his face burying itself in her shoulder. "It's complicated," she whispered. He laughed, shoving her off him. "How much more complicated can my quirk get? To everyone else, it's not real. I'm just crazy. Even to people with what they say I have, they don't understand it. I don't understand it." "He's not full," a quiet voice said from the table that they had all retreated to, except for Nana and Izuku. Kudo snapped his fingers, clicking his tongue loudly. "Don't, Hikage," he warned. Hikage shook his head, intertwining his hands as he looked Izuku up and down from where Nana held him. "You want to know who the shell is, kid?" he asked. Izuku pushed off Nana's tight grip, moving to stand beside Hikage. "Yes," he said forcefully, "I want to have a working quirk." Hikage laughed slightly, nodding. "It's exactly as I said. He's a shell. He's not one of us. Not yet." "Knock it off, Hikage," Dai said, hitting his shoulder. "You know that—" His gaze passed over Izuku before he shut his mouth. "What?" Izuku screamed, so tired. "What have you guys been keeping?" A loud scrape of a chair drew everyone's attention. Yoichi standing from the head of the table. Kudo went to grab his arm, but he stopped him, shaking his head. "I think you're old enough to know the truth about your quirk," he paused, sighing, "or your lack of one." Izuku's hands clenched as he watched the man move slowly. He had never seen him without Kudo or Bruce assisting him. He walked fine, in a straight line, his feet dragging just slightly. "What do you mean?" Izuku asked. He followed the man, feeling everyone's eyes on them. He grabbed a new notebook from the bookshelf, a blank one that had appeared. Yoichi slowly sat on the floor, taking a deep breath as he did so. Situated on the carpet, he looked more out of place than any of the others had over the years. He looked younger. "You don't have a quirk. You don't have DID," Yoichi said, motioning to the floor in front of him. Izuku sat, holding his pen above the pages. "Please," he said, glancing over to the blurry view of his vision. Kacchan's words were imperceptible and muffled. "Tell me what I need to know," he finished, looking back at Yoichi. "You have what you might think of as a genetic anomaly," Yoichi said. "It's not a quirk. You have no enhanced abilities, nothing that makes you more than the base human. It is not something you should have been born with, as quirks are. Rather, it was passed to you, both through blood and by DNA." "Those are the same thing," Izuku said quietly, his eyebrows furrowing in confusion as the man repeated himself. Yoichi shook his head slowly. "You are my quirk, and my quirk is you, the same as it is in all of us." He gestured to the 6 others who all sat around them on the carpet, in order. "You know who we are, Izuku, but have you figured out how we are all connected to you?" Izuku bit his lip, shaking his head. I don't have time for riddles," he said, bouncing his pen. "I don't have UA, and if I can't switch out—" His voice broke as he shut his eyes. "If I'm stuck here, I lose it all." Someone touched his chin, and he jumped slightly. "Not all," Nana said. "You have us, and if you just listen, you will figure it out." Kudo nodded, taking Yoichi's hand gently. "You're a smart kid. Listen to him," Kudo said. Izuku wiped his eyes, staring down at his page of whatever random words he remembered. His hand shook as he finally nodded. "No, I know you're all based on heroes, or are heroes, old ones, from before quirks." "Not quite," Yoichi said, shaking his head. "We are not heroes. None of us are. We are emblems of heroes' souls, trapped in this plane, unable to fully rejoin the rest of our souls in the afterlife, because we made an agreement." I didn't make a deal, though," Izuku asked. "I don't remember." Dai laughed slightly, shaking his head. He exaggerates. I didn't have a choice, much as you didn't when you joined us. He rolled his eyes towards Hikage, who shook his head in annoyance. You, Yoichi said, getting Izuku's attention back, were young. That is not the point of this, though. It's that we all had quirks at one point. Quirks are something that tie the human soul together. Even those with no quirks have the bond for it, though the fibers may be dull. But we all ended up here, and we still had our bonds attached. What happened? Izuku cut in. How did you all end up here? Yoichi sighed, shaking his head. You read the facts. You saw the articles. His hands tightened in Kudo's, whose brows furrowed. We all died, Izuku. Our souls were split into 2 pieces afterwards, held here. Izuku stared at him, his gaze passing over each person in turn. Kudo held Yoichi's gaze. Bruce touched a necklace he always wore. Hikage's usually stoic face was broken by a frown. Dai refused to make eye contact and nodded, his eyebrows set in a furrow. Nana just stared. It's a hell for you guys, Izuku whispered. My quirk is a hell for you. No, Yoichi said suddenly, before Izuku could dwell on it. It is an afterlife, but not hell. We have each other, and each new successor. We gain more as time goes, and we get to continue our life's dreams of being a hero, of saving people. Successor? Izuku asked, struggling to take in all the new information. That would be passed on, and quirks can't be passed on. That goes against everything we know about quirks. Their unique build and DNA. Part of them is custom built for the user. To have a quirk that can be passed between people, that can change, that can have successors, it's an anomaly that shouldn't exist in our world. As I said, Yoichi cut off his rambling, it is not a quirk as you know the meaning. Rather, it has more fibers than ever seen, stretched across us all. It is a unifier for each of our souls, and in turn, our quirks. Izuku shook his head, running his finger over the bullet points he had made. Your quirks. There are more, he asked softly, looking up. Yoichi shook his head, sighing as Kudo tightened his grip. Not anymore. But that is a story for another time. Izuku went to argue, but the older man continued. Each of us gained the quirk, and then died. Only then did our souls split and leave a side here. What comes before is simply a shell, a vessel waiting to be filled by the split soul. Izuku looked up at the vision now seated in the doctor's waiting office. You called the glowing person a shell, he recalled, so he is how you all were. Nana nodded slowly, biting her cheek. Before we died, she said softly, touching his hand. That means, he whispered, standing up slowly. The notebook dropped from his lap, but he didn't bother to pick it up. There's someone alive. Someone who knows what this all is, who can understand me, and you guys knew all along. He turned to Yoichi, his fist tightened. Why didn't you tell me? His voice going up slightly. Yoichi shook his head, accepting Kudo and Bruce's help to stand up. It is not that simple, Izuku. We didn't tell you for a reason. He's alive, Izuku yelled, motioning to the blurry image. There's someone alive, and dead people living in my head with 7 other dead people. You all were heroes, and actual heroes, and I didn't even get into stupid academy because of some stupid contract I didn't know about? Nana stepped closer, suddenly appearing too close to him. Izuku, please, we need to calm down to get you back out there. We? Izuku yelled. I didn't ask for a we, for you to come and ruin my life. You guys had a chance to live, and you died. Nana stepped back slightly, shaking her head. He didn't care. For all he knew, Mom could be in danger, because they still wouldn't tell him who it is. You know who it is. You've seen them like you've seen me. So just tell me. It's not the same, Bruce said softly. You are different. Have a stronger bond to the original quirk. It runs in your veins and is knotted around you. None of us have dealt with this before. Izuku shook his head, moving to the front. He would figure this out himself. He didn't have his hero school to figure it out anymore. He needed to work with it. He ignored Yoichi's warning from behind him, pressing his hand deep into the soft, strange fabric at the edge. It twisted and pushed back, sucking his hands in as he pushed harder. He twisted it violently, trying to grab a handful of the strange material. His vision exploded in blinding flashes of multicolored bursts. Each burst came with a different pain he had never experienced before. White made his stomach churn, the feeling of 1,000 ants in his throat. He gagged, blood hitting his hands as another flash replaced the white. Indigo left him feeling weak. Every bone in his body seemed to snap at once, the ants replaced by knives all over his skin. The next came red. Violent and sharp, it was over just as fast, a single burning pain in his chest. Lavender was soft. It held him tightly until it grew suffocating, his body aching as if he had run a marathon. It became claustrophobic, not letting him out of his grip. Orange was everywhere, pins and needles dragging into his body, ripping apart his skin, searching for something as it overtook him. Blue was warm. Too warm that it burned him hotter than anything. It made his eyes water and his throat swell. Deep purple was slow, dragged out pressure, swelling in his head, pushing and pushing until a final burst of pain. Then, nothing. Brilliant, bright yellow light, but nothing. No pain, no joy, no pleasure, simply nothing. His hand touched cold tile as his stomach heaved and he gagged. It was so fast and he was falling, his mind swimming. His vision swirled as he tried to open them to escape the bursts of light. It was violent and messy, and then gone, and it left him feeling worse than it had before. "We need to talk, Nezu," Chiyo said, holding open her boss and friend's door. The little chimera grinned at her from his desk, tipping his head in question. Chiyo didn't wait for permission, shutting the door behind her as she walked in and claimed a chair. "I assume this is not a friendly visit," Nezu asked, his whiskers twitching in understanding. "What can I do for you?" "You declined a student you needed to accept," she explained, smoothing out her shirt, "and I'm here to make sure you bring him in." Nezu raised an eyebrow, moving a different stack of papers in front of him. "Pray tell who you think I should have brought in." "Izuku-Midoriya," Chiyo said with a sigh. "You know very well who." Nezu nodded slightly, taking a paper from the center of his desk and setting the stack of papers to the side. "I am aware of who the child is, but I'm afraid there's been some issue. I cannot accept his application." Chiyo huffed, raising an eyebrow. "It wasn't a request, Nezu. That kid desperately needs help that he isn't going to get anywhere else, not without revealing his parentage to someone. And we both know how disastrous that would be," she added, leaning forward onto his desk. "Do you have a personal relationship with the child?" Nezu asked, the amusement heard in his voice. He wasn't the best at hiding moments of excitement and joy, his whiskers twitching every time. Chiyo frowned, resisting the urge to smack her boss with her cane. "You know very well I have been seeing that boy since he was a child. I've done all I can to agree with the other doctors, but that boy does not have any form of DID in any research field. Those alters, they have a past, ones they won't share with me." Nezu nodded, humming. "I am quite aware of the boy's remarkable condition. That is not what the issue here is." He held out his hands in a shrug, his grin stretching. "Then what is it?" Chiyo asked. "I did invite him to join us," Nezu said simply. Chiyo opened her mouth to counter, but he continued. "He very well cannot be a part of our hero course. By the way Toshinori acted during our evaluations makes that clear." Chiyo shook her head, frowning. "I don't understand." "His mother said the event transpired due to his rejection letter." Nezu's lip quirked up slightly, so she quickly added, "I won't tell you what happened. It is not of any concern to you." Nezu nodded, crossing his hands. "Understandable. Patient confidentiality is something I will not ask you to break. But rest assured, our dear young Midori was not declined from UA. I have enrolled him in our general studies program, alongside others who just did not make the cut." Chiyo shook her head, frowning. "He needs help with his condition," she said. "Our general studies program will not help him with that, especially not with the dependency he has with Bakugou, another boy who made it into the course. He's joined the Midoriyas on visits." Nezu frowned, his paws tapping together. "Do you ask me to risk the full ability of a teacher and hero for the sake of a single student? What if it gets out their relation due to their proximity?" He slid a paper across the table, a picture of the young boy's face on it. I have been following him closely, long before he ever came to our school. I'm assuming you have a plan, she asked, understanding her friend. Will I be privy to this plan? Nezu laughed, nodding as he jumped down from his chair. Of course, my dear. I will be the boy's mentor. He will learn what he needs from ectoplasm, and I will help him with his peculiar condition. He paused beside the door, looking back at her. After all, he is quirkless. Chio pushed herself up, leaning on her cane. Where do you think you are going, Nezu? He chuckled, holding the door open for her, his controller situated in his sleeve. To see the Midoriyas, of course. I must fix this misunderstanding. The door shut behind them as Chio shook her head in disbelief. Izuku paused, his pen hovering over the newest hero page. Kacchan appeared in the hallway, peeking into the room. Izuku quickly slammed his notebook shut, standing up to join his friend. Kacchan peered through the peephole, his eyebrows twisting in confusion. Who is it? Izuku asked softly, trying to shove him out of the way so he could see. Kacchan looked down at him, a small grin on his face. It's a rat, he said, with a slight laugh. Izuku shoved him out of the way, standing on his toes to look out. I'm a chimera, actually, the visitor countered, a small smile on his face. Oh my god, Izuku whispered, stepping back from the door. Kacchan, that's him! He yelled, grabbing Kacchan's hand. Kacchan frowned, looking past him. Who's the rat? Chimera, Izuku repeated at the same time the visitor did. It's Principal Nezu, he said, bouncing on his heels. From UA! Mom appeared from the hallway, rubbing her eyes as she yawned. What's with the yelling? Is everything all right? She asked, ruffling Izuku's hair. He bounced on his heels before Kacchan spoke. Izuku says it's Principal Nezu from UA, he said, his eyes fixed on the door. Mom gasped, pulling open the door quickly. Nezu stood in front of the door, his head cocked with a small smile. Miss Midoriya, what a pleasure it is to meet with you. He extended a hand, and Mom took it quickly, shaking it. Principal Nezu, she said quickly, opening the door more. Please, come in. Principal Nezu did so, walking inside the door as Mom shut it behind him gently. Would you like some tea or coffee? I can brew some. Unfortunately, Mitsuki at Bakugou's mother isn't here right now. I can go ahead and call her. Principal Nezu raised a hand, shaking his head. It is all right, ma'am. I'm actually here to speak to you about Izuku. He clapped his hands, looking around her. I assume it is Izuku I am speaking with. Izuku jumped at the sudden attention, nodding quickly. Kacchan stood in front of him, holding him back. What do you want with him? Haven't you done enough? Katsuki, Mom said, panicking. Don't speak to him like that. Nezu laughed, waving his hand in the air. It is all right. He held a hand out, gesturing for Izuku. I suppose I do have some explaining to do. Izuku stepped around Kacchan, walking to the small chimera. Hi, he said, trying and failing to hide his stutter. You already told him no, Kacchan yelled, stepping forward again. Why are you in our house? Mom nodded slightly, sitting down on the couch. I have to agree. I thought Izuku didn't make it into the hero course. Izuku sat beside her, Kacchan standing next to them. He did not, Nezu said, shaking his head. Even with his exceptional written test, his physical portion did not match our standards. Izuku tightened his fists in his lap, biting his cheek. Mom rubbed his back, but he shrugged her off, slamming his eyes shut. He couldn't switch out in front of Principal Nezu. He had to do this. I know, he whispered, tears hitting his hand. I know. However, Principal Nezu said, a paw touching his hand. Izuku looked up into the black eyes, a small smile on the chimera's face. You are still enrolled as a student of UA. It would be a shame not to foster that brilliant mind you have. Izuku stared at the chimera in shock as Mom gasped and grabbed his shoulders tightly. Izuku winced, pulling back as Mom took her hands off. Do you really mean it? Izuku can still go to UA? Principal Nezu nodded, taking his paw off his hand. Of course. I know it wasn't how you wanted, but it is how it will have to be. I would love to take you in as my personal student while also having you in the general education course. We have some very prolific teachers that I'm sure you'll love. Izuku nodded before he could think about it, looking up at Mom. Yes, I want to. Even if I can't be a hero, I can be with Kacchan. I want to go. Mom sighed, grinning down at him. Are you sure? Not so fast, Kacchan yelled. Why would you wait to tell us this now? Why not in the letter? Nezu chuckled slightly, shaking his head. Why, I did include a letter. It was attached to the automated one. May I see it? Kacchan shook his head, his fist tightening. I burned it. It was stupid to send them attached, he pointed out. Izuku rushed to apologize, but Nezu waved a hand. I assumed as much. That is why I came down here myself, to correct this little oversight. He clapped his hands together, nodding. Well then, can I expect to see you two at my school? Yes, Izuku said before Kacchan could. Yes, we'll be there. Splendid, Nezu said, clapping his hands. I would like to discuss some things with your mother, if you kids can give us a moment. His whiskers twitched as he smiled at them warmly. Izuku nodded, grabbing Kacchan's hand. Let's go, he said, dragging him off the couch. Hold up, Kacchan yelled, trying to pull back. They don't get to discuss stuff without us. Izuku continued to pull him, groaning as he pulled back. I know where we can listen. He got up on his toes and whispered to him. Kacchan's face broke out into a grin, and he nodded. Let's go play, Izuku, he yelled loudly, dragging Izuku forward instead. Izuku giggled, catching up with his friend. You were awful at being discreet, he whispered, shouldering the grinning blonde. Okay, so, that little bit of, angst at the beginning, that's gonna be it. Maybe. I guess it could be considered more as we get further in and, the whole reveal of Izuku and All Might thing, but, let's see. What are some things? Oh, yeah. So, UA. I very well couldn't have Izuku not attend UA, because, the other option would be Shiketsu, which I don't really want to write Shiketsu, and I don't want to separate Izuku and Bakugou. And then there's also Vigilantism, which none of them would condone. I'm sorry. None of them would condone it. Maybe, the first three, but that's a very light maybe, because they technically were vigilantes or whatever. Yes, he's going into Gen Ed. In Gen Ed, I have Shinso and a few students who we see, in the manga and anime, but that aren't really fleshed out. I try to flesh them out a little bit more. It doesn't have any romantic ships. What else? There was something else I wanted to talk. That angst thing with, when Izuku's yelling at them all and he ends up switching back out with the All Might. That white made his stomach turn. Indigo left him feeling weak. The next came red. Lavender was soft. Orange was everywhere. Blue was warm. Deep purple was slow. Then nothing. It's hard to explain, especially if, you haven't read my other series that has, two? I don't even know. There might only be two of, the Vestiges' lives. So that's actually how they all died. White was Yoichi, with him actually succumbing to his genetic thing that affects his lungs and heart and everything. So that coughing up blood was because blood got in his lungs, and yeah, that's how he died. Indigo was the next one. That is Kudo. Every bone in his body seemed to snap at once. The ants were placed by knives all over his skin. That was when All For One killed him. And I'm trying to think I remember exactly how All For One killed him. I think he got crushed. I think he got dropped and crushed. I think that's how I killed him in that one. And then the next came Red, violent and sharp. It was over just as fast. A single burning in his chest. That was a gunshot or a thing hit through him in his heart when he was fighting All For One. Lavender was soft. It held him tightly until it grew suffocating, his body aching as if he had run a marathon. It became claustrophobic, not letting him out of its grip. That is, Lavender was Hokage when they are, because Hokage died from that old age, which is why that's soft until it's not, because it's just so much at once for the body, and that's how he died, was just that so much at once. And Orange was everywhere, pins and needles dragging into his body, ripping apart his skin, searching for something as it overtook him. That is All For One searching for the quirk in Daigoro. Which is really dark, but that is All For One searching for something in Daigoro, which is what rips apart his skin. Blue was warm, too warm that it burned him hotter than anything. It made his eyes water and his throat swell. I believe N died in a fire. That is why that is how it is, because N died in a fire, and he literally burned to death. which is what Izuku felt in that. Deep purple was slow, dragged out pressure, swelling in his head, pushing and pushing until a final burst of pain. I believe All For One crushed Nana's head with his just boom, like a grate, just whoo, and then nothing. Brilliant, bright yellow, nothing, light, but nothing. No pain, no joy, no pleasure, simply nothing. And that is All Might, because he's not dead yet, so there's no way he can have that feeling. So it's just nothing, because there is nothing there, nothing registered. I was so proud of that one when I wrote it. I still am. I love him. Anyways, so I will not be going into angst. I probably will not be going into like injuries and everything. I don't recall if I went into. I said in the notes of this one that I might do Aizawa because the USJ without Izuku. I don't remember if I actually went into that. There were some people. I'm just gonna read through my comments and like respond to some of them. If you don't want to listen this far, feel free to go to the next one. Let's see. Someone said they didn't like Nezu in this one. And I'm like, okay, so that's fair in like the circumstance, but I love Nezu as a character to write so much. He's just so much fun. And he will get better. And might be the one to punch them. Because he's a lot. So. Someone's saying platonic stuff's the way to go. Because I said something about a ship. Yes, this is fully platonic. I think they may comment a little bit on Bakugou having a crush on Katsuki. But, really loved. I do love my platonic stuff. Anyways, the next one is called First Day and Friends. I hope you guys will all join me in the next one. Thank you so much for listening.